My name is Bob Long. I have a PhD in educational leadership and counseling, leadership and evaluation. I always say counseling because that's the department I work in. I've taught for the past 8 years in the programs in nonprofit leadership studies and the last couple of years in the doctoral program in education. I would describe the content of what I teach as upper level leadership and management kinds of courses, and the students come either from the major in nonprofit leadership or the minor, or from different master's programs across campus. So what I thought I might share with you is strategies I use for engaging students in the classroom, and then assignments or projects they engage in real world work that apply the principles in the classroom. So I don't think there's really any magic to engaging students in the classes. I think it really is about getting them to commit to doing the homework. So if we're going to process something in class in an activity that requires them to read a chapter in advance of the class, they have to read the chapter. And of course, how do you make sure that happens? Well, one way you do it is by getting a reputation of asking them questions in the class about that material, and making sure they understand their grade is dependent on them doing that. And so over a period of a couple of years, I got the reputation of holding students accountable by asking those questions, making notes when they hadn't read the material, and then using it in the grades and making it a part of the rubric. Well, it doesn't take long in upper level classes and combined upper level and grad classes for students to vote with their feet. Oh, this guy's serious. So he's going to do this. And what happens is then you get, I believe, that when you're really holding them accountable around the core content of the class, they do the homework or they don't take your classes. And you have some sort of an accountability really early in the semester around that kind of practice. So they see they got really poor performance grades because they kept coming to class unprepared. They hadn't read the 4 pages, or they hadn't done the research online, or they hadn't read the journal article. And you could tell when you ask them questions in class. So that seems awfully simple. But I took that from practice in executive development in my career before I came to teach at 60 years old. So it works. But you have to be religious about it. You have to actually do it. You have to take the notes. You have to hold them accountable for it. And then what you find, I believe, that happens is, once they commit to that, is the quality of their understanding of the material is apparent to you in the classroom. They have a real answer. It's not memorizing something, it's processing something. And so when they have an answer, it's both based on real content and their own interpretation of it. You have to give them classroom experiences. It's not just calling out. My classes have tended to be large here at Murray State. It's all relative, I know, but between 35 and 55. And so when you get around 45, 50 students in a class, you can't have that one-on-one engagement. So you have to give in-class activities that push them to process it, to work in small groups, to walk around the room and listen in and contribute to the conversation, to remember their names and to call on them by name and say, oh, that's a great idea, but could you tell me why you think that? How was that informed by what we read between last class and this? That level of engagement takes time, and you have to commit to that process of delivering the content. The other thing is you actually have to remember their names. I think it's a huge advantage. I'm famous, I believe, among my students for making them wear name tags, sticky name tags, for the first month until I've remembered their names. And then each time there's a group process, sorting them differently so that they all meet each other, keeping track of that so that then when you do group assignments, you do it in class, mixing the group differently. The sticky name tags aren't expensive, and man, has it been worth it, because I believe it improves the quality of my relationship with them when I know their names. I also believe it improves their relationships. So then the level of their engagement on the content, I think, grows significantly when they don't have to stop and wonder about who is that person. They've actually gotten to know each other. So that kind of in-class engagement, I think, has been a secret to any success I may have experienced in teaching. Students that don't want to be in that kind of class discover it quickly and they drop the class, or they don't take it in the first place. The second part of that application side is to have real world kinds of projects that have some individual accountability. So that's a two-parter, right? Individual accountability is that I think most of us remember college and group work as really sucking, because you'd have free riders who wouldn't do their share. You were committed to both learning and performance, and so you would make sure the work got done. So all of the accountability reporting on group work in my classes has an individual reflection and assessment so that I can tell whether or not they did it. I also pay attention and have class time where the group work is processed so I can hear what each person has to say about it. But that's hard, I'll give you that. The second part is the real world component. That may be easier in some disciplines than others, but one way that I've made sure that has happened in my classes is to build relationships with related organizations in the region who would be willing to work with a group of classroom students and would want to give them that experience. And then there has to be an exchange, right? There has to be a value exchange. They have to get something out of it too as organizations. So a couple of quick examples. One would be if I'm teaching fund development, particularly the grant writing and grant process, then we worked with our development office to acquire some resources, money, that the students could then give away in a grant process. It's been the way my wife and I have expressed our philanthropy locally. We're not wealthy, but I think we're a generous family. We raised our kids making decisions about where our family money would be given. So we let our kids are in their 30s now, and so I didn't have that expectation or responsibility. So our students gave away our money locally. So that meant they had to design a grant-making process. They had to work with local nonprofits to develop proposals. They had to review them. They had to, based on the criteria they had established, make the award. And so as a result of that, a lot of money has been given to local organizations through the courses that we've conducted on the grant process. Another example would be that we teach social entrepreneurship. And so we use the clinical model, much like many law schools do, where I got local nonprofits to apply to be the client. And then once one was selected, the students worked with that client, met 4 times during the semester to kind of understand their local context of what they were wrestling with, and then ultimately make a recommendation to them at the end of the semester and present them with a $1,000 check to help them with the cost of implementing some of the ideas that have been presented by the students. And the really cool part of this is now after 8 years, I know many of those client organizations have applied what the students recommended, real time. United Way, the Murray Art Guild, most recently the Humane Society, have talked extensively about the way in which the students' new thinking about being entrepreneurial. And that's not just money, that's shifting program design around long-term sustainability has really worked. And it gave the students a real life component to the application of the principles we were studying. So those would be a couple of elements that I think have resulted in students seriously taking on both the content and its application. And then the last thing I wanted to say is that that's hard to do. If I had just come from the field of practice 8 years ago, but even in those 8 years, the field is changing. And so staying current as a faculty member, staying engaged in the literature so that what I present them will be useful to them immediately upon graduation and going out into the field. I believe it has, but that's been a hard part of the job, is staying current so that what I presented them both in the content process as well as the application process was current. Go to the conferences, belong to the associations, have partners in the field, and engage them regularly in the process. And I think the results will be that if you choose to use an application kind of an approach, kind of engagement and application approach, you will be more successful, and your students will too. And I hope that was useful.